The hull screamed before the alarms even started, and I knew we were already dead, unless I did something in the next 10 seconds. Sparks rained down from the ceiling of the transport ship as I threw myself across the corridor, grabbing the release lever of the nearest escape pod. The ship was tearing apart around me, metal groaning like it was alive and dying at the same time. I did not have time to think about the 20 other passengers on other decks. I did not have time to think about anything except the woman sitting frozen in the corner of the pod bay, her silver eyes wide with a fear she was clearly not used to feeling. Her name was Sela Marrow. I only knew that because her name tag glowed faintly on her uniform collar, some sort of diplomatic badge from a species that called itself the Threnai. I had seen her exactly twice before this moment, both times when she walked past the engineering deck without looking at any of us, like we were part of the machinery. Now she looked at me like I was the only thing standing between her and the end of everything. I grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the pod. She resisted for half a second, some old instinct of superiority flickering even now, but the ship groaned again, louder, and she stopped resisting. I shoved her inside, jumped in after her, and slammed my palm on the emergency release. The pod tore away from the dying ship, just as the whole vessel lit up behind us, in a silent, terrible bloom of light. We spun. We fell. The pod's inertial dampeners screamed against forces they were never built to handle, and for a few seconds I could not tell up from down, could not hear anything except my own pulse hammering in my ears, and Sela's sharp intake of breath beside me. Then the ground came up to meet us, and everything went white. I woke up to the smell of burnt metal and a sound I did not recognize, something between a hiss and a growl, coming from somewhere outside the cracked viewport. My head throbbed. My left arm was scraped raw where the harness had bitten into it during the crash, but nothing felt broken. I turned my head and saw Sela slumped against the opposite wall, unconscious, a thin line of dark blue blood trailing from her temple. I do not know why my first instinct was to check if she was breathing before I checked our surroundings. Maybe it was just training. Maybe it was something else. Either way, she was breathing, shallow but steady, and that was enough for me to move. The viewport showed a sky the color of a bruise, purple and green swirling together like oil on water. Jagged black rock formations stretched out in every direction, and in the distance, something moved between them, low and fast, too far away to identify. I checked the pod's systems. Half of them were dead. The navigation core was fried beyond repair. The communication array showed a signal strength of 0, which meant we were either too far from any relay or something in the atmosphere was blocking us entirely. The only thing still functioning was a weak internal power cell, enough to keep the environmental scrubber running for maybe another day, 2 if I was careful. Sela stirred behind me and let out a sound that was somewhere between a groan and a word in a language I did not understand. Her eyes opened, unfocused at first, then sharpening, as the memory of the crash hit her all at once. She looked at me. She looked at the wreckage around us. Then she said, in perfectly clear trade common, the shared language used across half the known systems, "This is unacceptable." I almost laughed. Almost. "Yeah," I said. "Crashing usually is." She tried to stand and immediately winced, pressing a hand to her ribs. I moved to help her, but she pulled away from my hand like it had burned her. "I do not require assistance from labor class," she said. I stared at her for a long moment. Labor class, that was what her people called humans, the ones they hired for the dirtiest, most dangerous jobs across the trade routes, because we were cheap, resilient, and apparently disposable enough that nobody minded if a few of us did not come back. I had heard the term before. I had never had it said directly to my face by someone whose life I had just saved. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "Sit there and hold your ribs by yourself then. I have work to do." I turned my attention back to the pod's systems, running a full diagnostic while she watched me in silence from across the small cabin. The scanner gave me a picture of our situation that was worse than I had hoped and better than I had feared. We were on a planet with a breathable but thin atmosphere, gravity slightly heavier than what either of us was used to, and temperature swings that would go from scorching to freezing within a single-day cycle. There was no sign of any settlement, no sign of any other survivors from the ship, and no sign of rescue arriving anytime soon. The nearest emergency beacon relay, according to the last known data before the navigation core failed, was over 300 kilometers away, across terrain that the pod's sensors labeled with a warning I did not like the look of. "How long," Sela asked quietly, "before someone comes for us?" I did not want to lie to her, mostly because I did not see the point. "I don't know. Maybe never. If the ship's beacon went down with it. We need to build our own signal if we want anyone to find us." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at the cracked viewport and the alien sky beyond it. "My people will send a retrieval team," she said, though there was less certainty in her voice than before. "We are too valuable to abandon." I did not answer that. I had learned a long time ago that hope was not something you argued with when it was the only thing keeping someone standing. Night fell fast on that planet, faster than either of us expected, and with it came a cold that seeped through the pod's damaged hull like it was made of paper instead of metal. I spent the last of the daylight scavenging what I could from the wreck, pulling wiring, insulation, anything that might be useful later. Sela watched me work without offering to help, though I noticed her eyes following my hands with something that looked almost like curiosity beneath the irritation. It was the sound that came first, a low, rhythmic clicking, growing louder, circling the pod in the darkness outside. Sela went rigid. "What is that?" she whispered. "I don't know," I said, "and I don't want to find out from inside a pod with a broken door seal." I moved fast, wedging a length of pipe against the emergency hatch to reinforce the lock the crash had already weakened. The clicking grew louder, closer, until something heavy brushed against the outer hull, testing it. Sela pressed herself against the far wall, her composure finally cracking, her breathing quick and shallow. I grabbed a length of broken support strut, the closest thing to a tool I had, and stood between her and the hatch. Not because I was fearless, my hands were shaking as badly as hers, but because someone had to, and I was the one closest to the door. The creature outside scraped against the hull one more time, let out a sound like tearing fabric, and then, after a long, tense minute, the clicking faded into the distance. Neither of us moved for a long time after that. "You were prepared to fight it," Sela said eventually, her voice quiet in the darkness. "With that." "It's what I had," I said, lowering the strut, but not letting go of it. She did not respond to that, but something in the way she looked at me had changed, just slightly, like a crack forming in glass that had not shattered yet. The next morning, I got to work properly. The pod's power cell would not last forever, and the beacon we needed to build was not going to assemble itself. I stripped what I could from the pod's dead systems, salvaging capacitors, wiring, and a cracked but still partially functional signal amplifier. Sela watched from a distance at first, still nursing her injured ribs, still saying little. "You are attempting to build a transmitter," she said eventually, watching me splice two mismatched wires together with nothing but my hands and a pair of pliers I had found in an emergency kit. "Without proper tools. Without a schematic." "Don't need a schematic if you understand how the pieces work," I said, not looking up. "Just need to know what each part does and figure out how to make them talk to each other. My people would never attempt repairs without full diagnostic support and verified components," she said. There was no mockery in her voice this time, just genuine bewilderment. "Then it's a good thing I'm not your people," I said, and finally looked up at her. "Out here, you don't wait for the right tool. You use what you've got, or you don't survive." She was silent for a moment, studying me the way someone studies a puzzle they had not expected to find interesting. Then, to my surprise, she knelt down beside me, wincing slightly from her ribs, and held out her hand. "Show me," she said, "what each piece does." I hesitated for a second, surprised by the shift, then decided not to question it. I walked her through it, piece by piece, wire by wire, and for the first time since the crash, we worked as a team instead of two strangers, trapped in the same wreck. By midday, we had a rough frame for a signal booster, though it was still missing a stable power source, strong enough to send a distress call far enough to matter. That was when the ground began to shake. It started subtle, a faint vibration under our boots, easy to dismiss as nothing. Then it grew, and the black rock formations in the distance began to shift, cracks spreading across the ground like lightning frozen in stone. "Seismic event," Sela said, her voice tight. "This entire region may not be stable." I looked at our surroundings, the jagged terrain around the crash site, and felt my stomach drop as I noticed something I had missed before, hidden in the pod's earlier scans. We had crashed on the edge of a fault line, one that ran directly beneath the wreck. "We need to move," I said. "Now." We grabbed what supplies we could carry, the half-built beacon components, what little food and water remained, and ran. The ground continued to tremble beneath us as we scrambled up a rocky incline away from the crash site, boulders tumbling loose around us, the air filling with dust and the deep groaning sound of shifting stone. Sela stumbled once, her injured ribs slowing her down, and I caught her arm without thinking, hauling her forward as a section of the ground behind us collapsed into a sudden fissure that had not existed moments before. We did not stop running until we reached higher ground, lungs burning, hearts pounding, watching as the crash site we had called shelter for less than a day disappeared into a growing chasm below. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. We simply stood there, breathing hard, staring at what remained of our only shelter and half of our only hope for building a working beacon. "We lost most of the components," Sela said quietly, her voice hollow. "Not all of them," I said, patting the bag slung across my shoulder, the one I had grabbed on instinct during the scramble. Inside were the signal amplifier, the wiring, and the small battery core we had managed to salvage. It was not everything, but it was something. Sela looked at the bag, then at me, and something shifted in her expression that I could not quite name. "You saved the most important parts," she said, without hesitation, while the ground was collapsing beneath us. "Habit," I said, though it was more than that, and we both knew it. We found a shallow cave formed into the side of the rocky ridge, enough shelter to block the worst of the wind, while we assessed what we had left. Night was approaching again, and with the crash site gone, we had lost our best source of scrap material for finishing the beacon. "We need more parts," I said, examining what remained. "The amplifier alone isn't enough. We need a stronger power source, and something to boost the range." Sela was quiet for a moment, then reached up and unclasped a small device from her collar, the diplomatic badge I had seen glowing faintly since the day I first noticed her. She held it out to me. "This contains a compact energy cell," she said, "standard for authentication devices used by my people. It should not be as depleted as our other supplies." I stared at her, genuinely surprised. "You'd give that up? Isn't that some kind of status symbol?" "It is," she said simply, "but it is useless if we are both dead." I took the badge and got to work, carefully extracting the small cell inside without damaging it, my hands steady despite the cold and the growing dark. Sela watched closely this time, no longer with detached curiosity, but with genuine attention, occasionally asking questions about why I connected certain wires in certain ways, why I tested each connection twice before moving forward. By the time the second night fell fully around us, we had a working beacon, fragile and improvised, but functional. I flipped the switch, and a faint hum filled the small cave as the signal began to pulse outward into the darkness. "Now we wait," I said. "For how long?" Sela asked. "However long it takes," I said. "That's the only answer I've got." The following days blurred together in a rhythm of survival. We rationed what food we had left, found a source of questionably safe water that I filtered as best I could, using cloth and charcoal from a small fire, and took turns keeping watch through the long, cold nights, while the beacon continued its steady pulse into the sky above us. Sela changed during those days, slowly, in ways she probably did not fully notice herself. She stopped flinching when I offered a hand to help her over rocky terrain. She started asking questions, not out of suspicion, but out of genuine interest, about how I had learned to fix things with nothing but scraps, about why humans seem to treat impossible situations as puzzles to solve, rather than reasons to give up. "On my homeworld," she told me one night, as we sat close to a small fire for warmth, "if something breaks beyond simple repair, we replace it. We do not fix what cannot be perfectly restored. There is no honor in patched, imperfect solutions." "Out here," I said, Patched and imperfect is the difference between living and not living. I'll take imperfect every time. She was quiet for a while, watching the fire. My people call your species the unkillable ones, she said eventually. Not because you are strong, though you are stronger than you appear, because no matter what is taken from you, you find a way to continue. We did not understand why, until now. I did not know what to say to that, so I said nothing, and we sat in comfortable silence as the fire crackled between us. On the 5th day, the weather turned violent, a storm rolling in from the horizon, with winds strong enough to tear loose rock from the cliffside above our shelter. We huddled deeper into the cave, bracing against the shaking walls, the beacon's fragile wiring flickering dangerously with each gust that found its way inside. If the beacon fails now, Sela said, gripping my arm as the wind howled outside, we may not have the parts to rebuild it. I did not answer. Instead, I moved toward the failing wires, shielding them with my own body against the wind, working with numb fingers to reinforce the connections before they could fail completely. Sela grabbed a torn piece of fabric from her uniform without being asked, and helped me wrap it around the exposed wiring, her hands working alongside mine despite the freezing wind and the danger of the storm around us. We worked together until the connections held steady, the beacon's hum stabilizing even as the storm raged outside. When it was done, we sat back against the cave wall, exhausted, breathing hard, and for the first time, Sela smiled at me, a small, tired, genuine smile. We make a good team, human, she said. Daniel, I said. My name is Daniel. Daniel, she repeated, like she was testing the shape of it. Sela. I know, I said. I've known since the ship. She looked surprised by that, then, oddly, pleased. The storm passed by morning, leaving the sky clearer than it had been since the crash, a strange, pale blue, finally breaking through the usual bruised colors above us. We stepped outside the cave to assess the damage, and that was when we heard it, a distant, mechanical hum growing steadily louder, cutting through the quiet morning air. Sela's eyes widened. That is a retrieval shuttle, she said, her voice barely above a whisper, like she did not dare believe it yet. We scrambled up to the highest point of the ridge, waving anything we could find, shouting until our voices grew hoarse, watching as a sleek, unfamiliar vessel descended slowly through the clearing sky toward the source of our beacon's signal. It touched down not far from our position, and a hatch opened, revealing figures in unfamiliar uniforms, some Threnai, some other species I did not recognize, all part of what I assumed was some kind of joint rescue coalition that had picked up our distress signal. Sela turned to me, before we moved toward the shuttle, her expression unreadable for a moment, caught between relief and something else entirely. When we return, she said, my people will ask how we survived. What will I tell them? I thought about it for a moment, then smiled, exhausted but genuinely happy for the first time in days. Tell them the truth, I said. Tell them you survived because you stopped seeing me as labor class, and started seeing me as a person who happened to be pretty good with wires. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised out of her, like she had not expected to still be capable of it after everything. I will tell them exactly that, she said. We walked toward the shuttle together, side by side, leaving behind the wreckage, the storm, and the version of each of us that had existed before the crash. Whatever happened next, whatever her people thought of humans, whatever mine thought of hers, I knew one thing for certain, as we boarded that shuttle and left the hostile planet behind us. She would never look at a human the same way again. And honestly, neither would I look at her people the same way either. Sometimes survival is not just about staying alive. Sometimes it is about learning who you really are when everything else has been stripped away, and finding out that the person standing beside you through all of it was worth more than either of you ever expected.